And welcome to the session of the Data Management Plan. In today's session, we will understand what Data Management Plan is all about. So we'll look into the introduction to the DMP. Then we will understand the purpose of having the Data Management Plan in place, certain minimum standards in maintaining and building the DMP, the best practices around Data Management Plan in the industry. Finally, we will understand a bit about the creation, maintenance, and then an in-depth organization of the DMP. After the conclusion of the slides, we will also look at a sample of the DMP of how it would ideally be constructed. So data management plans basically are created by the clinical data management team to document how data management for a given study was being carried out. Data management plans are not really required by any law or regulation, but are so common across the biopharmaceutical companies that they are considered an auditable document. And we will know about this in the slides. Before we actually go into the introduction of the DMP, let's understand the history of DMP just for an information sake. And it's not really very it'll not really affect your overall knowledge of DMP, but a little background to how this DMPs came into existence could be good to hear. The history of how DMPs came into existence helps to illuminate how they are used today and will also is the reason for explaining their current structure. From the time that data management groups were first formed, data managers would used to set up the studies, collect it, and even enter the data, clean those data, and then process the data until the study was ready for analysis. For the most part, these groups did a very good job and produced data sets with accurate data that reflected values provided by the investigator sites. But over the time, the idea of if you didn't document, it wasn't done became the rule, and groups made an effort to produce documents at key points along the way during the conduct of the trial to record what was done by CDM and provide a very good evidence of good practice. Now, these documents are still filed together in what we simply call as the study file, okay, or the trial file. To ensure that study files across groups were consistent, the companies then eventually wrote standard operating procedures that outlined what the contents of each such study file should go on. Again, with good study files, some data management groups found that they could not always find an answer very quickly when an auditor asked them a specific question on the conduct of a past study. So in the early 90s, some companies began to address this problem by creating a document whose purpose was to record all of the important information on how data management was carried out for any specific given study. They found that creating this kind of document right at the start of the study provided an value add beyond its function as a reference for auditors. It forced the study in planning the work before even it was being carried out. And these documents were also more accurate when they were written at the start of the study than as a summary or as a summary report at the end of the study. So these documents summarizing all the data management activities, this was called as the data management plans or the data handling plans. Around mid to late 1990s, DMPs were in common use and data managers could attend seminars or courses on how to write and maintain them. In the early 2000s, DMP came to be considered as an auditable document. Before serving as a tool to provide information during an audit, experience has shown that DMPs has even a higher value to data management groups in that they aid in the transition of studies, in the transition of the studies between data managers and providing a very clear history or specific studies that go through a complicated life cycle. In today's world, DMPs are considered as industry standards. At the beginning of the DMP, or at the beginning of a study, the DMP provides a focus for identifying the data management work to be performed, who will perform that work, and what is to be produced as documentation of the work. During the study, the DMP is updated as key elements of the data management process change so that at the end of the study, the DMP provides an accurate record of how the study was carried out. So, with that historical background of how DMP came into existence, let's understand what DMP thoroughly is. What are the key factors why DMP became a very key document for CDM? The very first thing that a DMP does is it provides a roadmap to data management team, which means that a DMP which has been drafted really well, which takes care of every data management activities of the trial, will provide a roadmap on how to handle the data under any foreseeable circumstances. So it will consider everything that would typically happen in a trial. And because of that, those events, how will the data be affected and how to process such the data that is received. It will also take care of any unforeseeable conditions which may not have been uh, identified during the drafting of the DMP, or it may not be identified throughout the conduct of the trial, but say it occurs, then what should the DMP will at least guide what could be the probable actions or which probable teams the study team can refer to when they are facing such unforeseeable conditions. A very simple example of this would be during the conduct of the trial, they realize that there are certain potential protocol deviations, okay? Protocol violations, okay? Deviation is different, violation is different. So there are protocol violations. Now, if there are protocol violations, what should be the immediate actions to be taken? Who are the support teams who are to be contacted? What specific actions will be taken? Which stakeholders are to be informed? Should it be the sponsors? If a DMP is being drafted by a CRO and the entire study conduct is in the CRO, then how the sponsors should be notified? Are there any industry standards around reporting of the protocol violations? The organization may also have created certain specific internal processes and SOPs. A reference to those SOPs would be given. Probably the organization also has a support team who specifically handle protocol violation cases for studies. So they could be referenced as well in actioning those data. So roadmap to data management. Then comes the consistent approach. In consistent approach, we are basically intending to say that DMP will be in place, right, as we said from the historical introduction, that its best works when it is created right at the start of the study. That means even before the data collection begins, all the possible scenarios, the possible process steps are to be laid down in the data management plan. And because it involves data handling, where multiple functional groups could be involved. For example, your CRA, site monitors would be involved. Uh, if there could be central monitoring team, as in cases of risk-based studies, the central monitoring team will be involved. Then there will also be data handled by biostatisticians, because they would probably do some interim checks throughout the conduct of the study. There will also be medical monitors involved who will look at the safety and efficacy parts of the data. There will be data management, of course, and then we have the coding team who will look into the medical coding aspects of events and medications. So when all of these groups will handle the same data that's flowing into the central case report forms, how this data will be handled. If there is an escalation required, let's say the data managers are unable to get a perfect answer to their queries, then can the data managers write to the CRAs to help site resolve the queries that data managers are raising? Or how frequently will biostatisticians run their statistical programs on the data sets from the from the EDC? And which team will they send their output so that the team can look into those issues and start issuing queries? Will it be the data management team? And if it is the data management team, which other teams will be involved? Will the medical team be also involved because there are certain safety and efficacy aspects? Will the biostatisticians' findings first be understood by the medical team? If the medical team still feels it necessary, only then a query will be issued. So these nitty-gritties, all of that will be mentioned in the DMP. Then it is crucial, therefore, that all the parties refer to this DMP. They all understand how the data will be handled by each of these functional groups. They have an understanding of data flow, and they all agree for this approach by signing the DMP that, yes, we agree that this is how things will be for the study. Now, DMP is an auditable document, as mentioned at the start of the session. When we say DMP is an auditable document, that is, during this time, what basically happens is the auditor who is investigating the clinical data management practices will consistently compare the degree to which the project is following the process steps that are mentioned in clinical data management. So the actual steps will be checked against the DMP steps. And if there are anything that's mentioned in the DMP but is missing in the actual events, those will be reported as a finding. So just to give an example of what kind of possibilities would be checked is the DMP for a specific study mentions how the queries which have to be escalated, or the queries which are unresolved in spite of issuing them for a specific times, those queries have been, how do we resolve those queries? Okay, what is the usual escalation metrics within the study team when an issue is on hold for a very long time, and there is some evidence required of how final decision was taken by the study team? So the DMP would usually talk about what is the usual matrix. So let's say if the data managers are unable to get the queries resolved or the issue resolved through their queries, then this goes into a central issues tracker document. Now, that issues tracker document has to be either shared with the CRAs, the site monitors, or the lead data manager has to share it with the sponsor for further guidance on how these actions should be taken. Within the sponsor, again, it will be the manager of the sponsor, the medical team, so the extended study team of the sponsor who will look into the specific issues as per the expertise that are required for each issues and will provide their comments as to what actions should be taken. So sometimes they would rather accept because of the site's response. The medical team would probably look at the entire issue. They will look at the entire CRF, and then they make this consent or this decision that the the issue has to be closed and ABC actions has to be taken. We need to just document it from our side that this is why we are accepting the document. Some decision like this. For certain other issues where there is a data discrepancy and it has to be resolved by the site because there has to be a connection of how the data is flowing. The sponsor might probably ask that the site monitors can do an on-site visit with the site and look into the source data documents to verify what the actual data is. And then based on that, the CRA is to write back to the data management team on the findings so that the study team can take a decision on the issue. So this issue tracker, if this is how TMP is mentioning that there has to be a central issue tracker where on hold issues should be logged in, the auditor might ask for an issue tracker. And they will also look at how the issue tracker has been updated, how it is being communicated, how are things mentioned within the issue tracker. If the organization has centrally created a standard template for issue trackers, which can be just picked up by any study, then the auditor would go with that additional step of comparing the issue tracker with the SOP of the organization as well. So this is how DMP becomes an auditable document. Then it guides the study throughout the activities or throughout the study cycle. So anytime any issues being faced, the DMP can be actively referenced by the data managers. Then it helps the study to stay at par because every data management activity that was drafted in the DMP has been agreed upon by all parties, and all of these stakeholders, all the functional groups have jointly authorized those processes that this is going to be applicable to the study. Let's now understand the purpose of DMP. Now, the DMP documents the processes and steps which are employed by the organization, as we mentioned in the previous slide, to promote a consistent, efficient, and effective data management practices for every specific study. The primary goal of the DMP would be to ensure that everybody who is involved in data management, in data handling, every specific stakeholder will have the necessary knowledge to create and maintain a very high quality database, which is always ready for analysis. The DMP will serve as an authoritative resource. which means that it will document all the data management practices. Okay, so basically it will include everything about, let's say, right from the start of the study till the end of the study. So it will talk about CRF creation, CRF designing, eCRF creations. Uh, then the entire database is how, the building of the database, the design of the database, edit check specifications, that is the auto queries that will be created within the database itself. It will also talk about database testing before it is going live, before it is moved to production. User acceptance testing has been performed on the database that's designed. It will talk about the general data workflow, query management. If there are third parties involved, it will talk about third parties. Then also it will talk about how to manage any other kind of non-CRF data. Let's say patient-reported outcomes or device that are being used in the study for reporting the patient information. Then it will also talk about coding, safety data handling, specifically essays, how they are to be reconciled, what actions to be looked at, which are the databases to be compared. Okay. Finally, towards the study log, they will also talk about the final study log processes that needs to be performed. Then the entire study log procedures and different kind of actions that are required, and then the final transfers of the data. In addition to documenting these standard CDM activities, the DMP will also provide a location for documenting details on computer systems, which will be used to collect the clinical trial data. And this is as per the recommendation of the FDA's guidance document of computerized system used in clinical investigation. The FDA clearly recommends that for each study, the documentation should identify the softwares and the hardwares that will be used to create, modify, maintain, archive, retrieve, or even transmit the clinical data. So though DMP is not being submitted to the FDA, the documentation is retained as a part of the study records, and they would be available for inspection by the FDA. So, and that takes care of the next point here, that DMP will comply with all the applicable regulatory guidelines as well as the local laws of the country. And then it will also take care of the SOPs of the organization itself, where these documents will be working. Then, this point is very critical, that the DMP should address any procedural or protocol updates that are made during the conduct of the study. Now, there could be various reasons why a DMP. Yep. So there could be various reasons where the DMP may be updated during the conduct or during the during the conduct phase of the study. And these reasons could be because of certain critical changes that are made into the way the study is going to be performed. So there could be results because of a protocol amendment, or there could be new updates made to the study, either in terms of new screens being added or new methods of assessments being introduced. For an example, when during the pandemic, when COVID was affecting the entire world, all the trials were being considered of how to implement this COVID-related issues into the study, and also consider possibilities of how COVID would affect all the studies. And as a result of this, some of the sponsors had ensured that all their studies, irrespective of the indications involved in the study, would have COVID forms included in their trials to capture information around COVID and their effect on the current indications of the study. Then there could also be, like we said, changes in the process. Okay. Now, as a result of all of these activities, okay, or there could be that because of certain audit or inspection findings, there has been some new updates added, right? So your updates could be because of process related, it could be an audit finding that has recently happened, or because of certain the data cuts that happen, and the DSMB uh, reviews that keep happening. Okay, so this is again this committee of DSMB. Okay, this review board, they are basically involved in seeing if how the study is progressing and whether we require any changes in the study. Okay, and if there is a new process that has to be done, or the objectives of the studies have to be amended in any ways. So all of that information, because of this, what will happen is some major things, it will affect the final data. And if it is affecting the final data, it's important that DMP takes care of how to handle this updated information in the data. So therefore, your DMP is a live document. So throughout the conduct phase of the study, the DMP may have multiple versions. There could be up-versionings, and it is important that these versions are effective date controlled and versions are being very strictly monitored by the organization. Then let's look at certain minimum standards. Now the minimum standards of the DMP are the first one is to complete a draft of the DMP prior to the enrollment of the first subject. By doing this, we ensure that the requisite processes are in place, the screens are developed, and they are developed as per the data quality, ensuring a highest database release, high quality database release. So completing the draft DMP before the enrollment of the first subject. Then it ensures also that the DMP will support with the compliance with the current applicable regulations, which are applicable in that specific country, any kind of agencies, the requirements of it. Okay. They will also identify and define any kind of personnel and roles which are involved in the decision making, data collection, data handling, and quality control. That means which are the teams to be involved when a decision has to be made. Will it be the sponsors team who will do the final decision making? Which are the stakeholders within the sponsor who will be responsible for making that decision? How will the data be collected? Okay, whether it will be purely the CRFs only, or there will be a third party patient reported outcomes, or eCRFs that will be used to get the information. So now what is an eCRF? So an ECOA is basically the clinical outcome assessments. Okay, and these are they are basically the measurements, or they measure how the patient is feeling and functioning. So it's usually a part of the clinical trial, and it measures the efficacy of a specific intervention or the investigational product under use. So how efficient it is and how the patient feels through the use of those products. So that's one of the measurements. So that's your data handling. So this is called as clinical outcome assessment. ePro is a part of one of the clinical outcome assessments is patient reported data, where again, patients will look into a lot of questionnaires, or there are some scales on which they are supposed to rate how they feel, and data would be directly completed from them. There could also be certain devices which will be attached to the subject, to the patients, so that it continuously monitors their body measurements, their specific measurements throughout, and the data is already fed into these devices. Okay, so for example, if it's a critical study where the blood pressure of the subject has to be monitored constantly. Okay, so at that time, these wearable devices are being given to the subject, and throughout uh, throughout their lives, they are supposed to wear this during the conduct of the trial, and the device constantly monitors these measurements, and stores the the differences and the measurements taken throughout. Then it will look into the data handling like we discussed in the previous slides. And then it will also talk about the quality control. That means once the data starts flowing in, people start looking into the data, and all the different functional roles start working on the data. What kind of actions are required? And when they take those actions, are they performing it right, or are there accidental errors being introduced into it? So when these accidental errors are being introduced, how are the teams looking into it? So a random quality check is being performed for their data. So it could be either a peer review that is within the study team itself. One person works, and there could be a senior staff who would be probably reviewing the data, or there could be a third, or there could be a independent uh, teams also being set up by organizations. And this independent team only performs quality checks on the studies that are present within the organization. And that could be at a regular cadence. They would probably do it monthly once, and then they would release certain standard scores, which will be linked to the organization's goal for the employees, that their studies should not have quality uh, error rates more than 5%, let's say, for example. So if there is a quality control involved, so how to mention the quality? How frequently are they even doing the checks? Then ensuring that the data management processes are described and defined from the study initiation until database closeout. And I already listed down the different activities that would be covered. Let's now look at certain best practices. Now, all the stakeholders which are involved in the DMP should be involved while drafting the DMP so that everybody is aware. Then it's recommended that there should be a standardized template for DMP. Okay. And towards the end of the slide, we will also look at one such standard template as an example. So now what is a standard template? When an organization is going to be working on many protocols, it is evident that the organization will have to create the data management plan for each of those studies. Now, this is not a small document. It could be extensive depending upon the complexity of the study and the activities involved in the study. So, and more or less, the list of activities will remain the same for any kind of interventional study, okay, or a phase 2 to phase 3 studies. So, since the activities are more or less the same across the protocol, across the organization and across different protocols, it makes more sense for the organization to first create one standard template centrally so that the study teams can adopt these templates very quickly and just make those very study specific, protocol specific customizations. The advantage of using this standard template would be obviously time saving, because not everything has to be written right from scratch. Secondly, it could be resource as well as cost saving, because ultimately time and resource saving impacts the cost of the study. So the cost of the study is also reduced. Next one is going to be the implementation of the information. The time that is required is less, so it can be quickly implemented. The timelines for DMP will be reduced very short. It will be very short. And then we are on track of doing all the activities, because the setup requires a lot of activities to be completed simultaneously. So having a standard template minimizes or reduces some of the workload to create a DMP and rather customize the DMP very specifically for the study. So the focus is also much better, because now basic information remains the same. So the team need not focus a lot on putting that basic information, but rather make sure that anything which is protocol specific, anything which is going to be very critical, has been included in the DMP now. So standard template for DMP at the organization level for consistency really helps. That, as mentioned in the previous slide, DMP is a live document. So it's very important. And from the audit perspective, also very critical that the DMP is correctly versioned. It is always ensuring that every staff working on that specific study uses only the current version of the DMP and they are not referencing some old versions. And that every time there is a DMP update, the staff is trained on those current processes and the updates that are made with each version. There may be a requirement of the auditor asking for a documentation of this specific training that they have done for the DMP. So what currently organizations basically do is they have already set up their systems for e-learnings. So what they do is they release these DMPs to all the specific roles who will be using the DMP. And those roles, the people in those roles will have to acknowledge the updated DMP electronically within the system. And that serves as a documentation that the updated DMP has been referred. With advancement in technologies, what can also happen is even if people are spread across the globe and are in different time zones, and trainings may become difficult for let's say a lead data manager in US for the teams working in Asia or the EMEA. So what they can also do is the technology now allows recording of the entire session just like this. And the entire updates to the DMP can be recorded and it can be shared again as a e-learning. It can be updated as a e-learning in the organization's learning site. And then all are being asked to acknowledge this before some due date. So before the due date, the teams acknowledge that they have gone through this training. Each individual provides their own authentication. And then that comes as a transcript, which the auditor sees that before the new process was actually worked upon, the team completed the training. Finally, very important, DMP has to be signed by all the stakeholders. So all stakeholders who were involved in the creation of this document will require to sign it. Signature could be a wet signature or it could be an e-signature. E-signature is because nowadays DMP is usually stored in the trial master file, the electronic trial master files of the study. So electronic trial master files are have progressed enough where all the relevant stakeholders can simply e-sign them within the eTMF. And there it serves as the main repository for all the final versions of the study document. Now, let's understand how DMP is first created. Now, for every new study, a clinical data management, that is your CDM personnel, will require the following documents for creation of the DMP. Let's go through each and I will also talk about the reasons why we are using some of these. So protocol is very evident because all specific assessments comes from the protocol. Why will a work scope and a contract is required? Now, a contract is required, say for example, it's not every time that the sponsor DM team will create the DMP. Sometimes when the sponsor is contracting the CRO, okay, a contract research organization, to perform the activities on their behalf, then the CRO may start creating the DMP. So again, it depends what kind of contract has been given to the CRO. Is it that only the entire end-to-end services are given to CRO or only certain specific activities? So sometimes sponsor might retain, let's say, monitoring with themselves. And with the CROs, they would only give data management activities and BIOS activities, the biostatistician statistical activities. So only DM team and BIOS team will be from CRO. The rest of the team will be from the sponsor. So in that case, the data manager of the CRO will ensure that only these two cases are being involved in the CRO's team. And where data requires other functional teams, accordingly from the sponsor side, how that actions will be taken, that has to be referenced in the DMP. Likewise, within the DM again, let's say, now let's understand work scope. Within DM itself, not necessary that the CRO might do everything end to end. So it may happen that the data manager here would do most of the reconciliation activities. But the sponsor data manager may do the rest of the activities, which is basically attending the investigator meeting and presenting the data management side. Then there could also be, apologies, or the data manager will be involved in the sponsor DM would be the ones where all the issue escalations will be resolved by them. Okay. So this difference, the work scope difference, that has to be, will come from the work scope. So depending upon what is being given to the CROs, your DMP will specifically call that out, those activities. So therefore, work scope and contract is important. Analysis plan, because the end result of handling the data is to deliver quality data sets, which will be which can be analyzed by the statistical team. Hence, the studies usually start with this end in mind, that what affects my analysis data sets. I ensure that from the beginning only those data points are collected with the highest quality. And in order to collect them with the highest quality, what kind of data management, data processing steps should be in place? How data should be collected? What kind of real-time cleaning should be performed by them? Okay. When they're trying to perform this real-time data cleaning, what should be taken care of for any kind of escalations or issues that are on hold? What should be the general data workflow? Okay. So therefore, data analysis plan would basically give them that information of which data is critical for analysis. Then is your data flows. So your data flows is basically talking about how the data will go from one stakeholder to the next. That is, first, how the data has to come from the site. Will it be through the CRFs, or will it come from the patients and it will come through certain devices worn by the patients? Or it will be that how the sites will send the samples to the third party vendors, and from the vendors, how the data will come to the data management team. Case report forms. Why are case report forms important? Because most of the data is collected on the CRF. So how the data will should look like? What are the important critical points on the data on the CRFs? If there are any derived fields, so how those data will be handled? Then data management standards, because it's expected that currently the regulatory teams prefer data sets, analysis data sets that are being shared in the SDTM format. Okay. Now, SDTM is one of the CDISC form for standards that is being used for the data submissions. So most of the organizations now set up their database as per the SDTM standards, the CDISC standards. And that is why knowing data standards will help understand how the variables will be collected within the CRF. Okay, what are the general naming conventions? What is how the database has been set up as per the SCTM, and how that affects the data and my ultimate data handling. Then you can also look at sister studies if applicable. So sometimes what happens is sponsors will use the same drug, and the objectives change slightly for the same drug. Okay. And so there could be multiple protocols for the same drug. Now, when this happens, what is best done is, or sometimes what also happens is the trials are in continuous, you know, are continuous, which means that the patients from the first study, once they complete the entire study, they will then move into this extension study, which will be a second protocol. Okay. So basically, there will be just an extension and there will be some more objectives of the second study for the same drug. So what happens is it becomes more easier if we have the DMP for such kind of sister studies, they can be easily picked up and used it as a reference to create a new DMP, because the study specific norms will also now remain the same and there will be very minimum customizable changes for the newer protocol. Then the DMP, as said, should be drafted by all the responsible parties and they should be approved before the work is beginning. Then from the maintenance aspect, as mentioned earlier, version control is extremely important and all the parties which are involved should agree with the content that has been upversioned now. Now, as mentioned in the previous ones also, here is the final list of probable lists causes for a protocol amendment. For a DMP update, there could be amendments in protocol, process update has been done, maybe because of, let's say, certain quality incidents, internal review, some trend analysis. The process was fine-tuned. So it is now more foolproof and it ensures better quality. Sponsor has made certain decisions of including, excluding some forms that could be the result of the DSMB reviews and all. And then finally, you can also have certain system updates. So sometimes, let's say the sponsor started off the trial in one internal EDC. Okay. They created their custom EDC screens in-house CDMS. But they realized through the middle of the trial that this internal CDMS is not as effective as some commercially available ones like Rave and Viva. So then in that situation, they might make this decision that it makes more sense to move from the in-house EDC to this commercially available EDC. So the entire data may now move from this in-house to, let's say, Rave. So then also, obviously, because the screens are new, there will be slight variations in how these EDCs operate. They may be different in the way the data looks like and how the data should be actioned. Then in that situation, obviously, there will be an upgrade to the DMP. Or there could also be cases where, and depends upon the organization. Sometimes the sponsors would want to switch the CROs right in the middle of the study, which means that one CRO may have to transition of the study to some other CRO or another third party vendor. So when this happens again, it depends upon the incoming CRO vendor, if they would want to have an internal DMP as well, or they would want to continue with the CRO DMP. So there could be an changes in the DMP templates in the entire way the DMP has been collected. So DMP will usually have a very unique version number. So each final update should have a proper version number. The general documentation practice is that any kind of minor versions update, they should be point decimal upgrades. So let's say version 1 was the final version, and after that, a very minor change has been done into the DMP. Okay. If that is there, then they would probably just put this as version 1.1 as a new draft. But if there are any major updates which are affecting the entire, all the stakeholders, and it's a major upgrade, then uh, the next version will be version 2.0. Okay. So decimal upgrades for minor changes, minor updates, and one whole number decimal, whole number updates for the final one. So this is one of the good documentation practices for certain organization. Uh, there always is an effective date associated with that upgrade, so that when the auditor also compares how initially the data was handled and then how the data got changed, they know that up till what effective date, up till what date the company followed the previous data conventions. And now that only the newer data will be seeing the new ways of will have newer changes to them and newer ways being handled. It is very essential that because it's an auditable document, there has to be uh, a revision history of the DMP so that each revision can be explained well. Now, again, depending upon the organization, some organizations would want every minor update also a part of the DMP revision history, whereas some organizations would expect only the major updates to be a part of the revision history. Now, interestingly so, there is another thing also, which is about the standard template that is being created for the DMP within the organization. Now, these standard templates are also version controlled. So sometimes what happens is the study is in the conduct, and some of these studies go on for years. So they started off with one template. They took the current version of the template when the study was initiated. And while their study was ongoing, the organization upgraded their template too. So the current DMP template has upgraded. Now, again, the study is going to go on for another 2 years. So the decision whether they want to stick to the existing template that they have used in their study, or should they adopt the newer version of template that's been taken by the that has been created by the organization. That decision, again, the SOPs, the guidance documents of the organization should let the team know. So whether they should adopt the new DMP template and move into the new DMP template, or will they be putting this as a note within the revision history itself that they would not want to move to the new template because the content, and they have already adopted those changes in the current version itself. So it highly depends on the organization. So data managers who are in DMP creation, DMP upgrades have to consider all of these pointers. What if my template updates, or what if new changes are adopted to me? So how do I move to each of these? Then post the study has been completed, the DMP should be archived, as said, with all the critical study documentation. And here are the list of different organizations of what would ideally go in the study. Okay. The first one is the approval page. Typically, a DMP has an approval page. The approval page will contain study identifier, primary reviewers, and it will also have the date when they have approved it. So this would basically so let's say in your organization, the DMP creation was with the CRA. So that is clinical operations team basically. So the clinical lead would instead be involved in the review. So clinical team was involved. Then your medical monitoring team was involved. Your biostatistician was involved. Programming team was involved because it involves database creation details as well. And then you have your DMP, your data management team. So signatures has to be there, or approval has to be there. Authorization page should have all of these people listed, and there should be signatures from each of them. If this is created by a sponsor, a CRO, then probably there will be another signature by this sponsor that they also approve the CRO DMP. Then is the protocol summary. Many organizations may include a short synopsis of the study protocol, visit schedule, and critical data analysis, which are uh, critical data analysis variables within the DMP. So there will be a shorter protocol summary version also available. So the usual protocol will have the entire history of how it was, how the compound was being used. Then it will talk about details about each and every activity. Summary will just talk about the basics, the most critical data variables, and the general visit schedule. This is also called a synopsis in certain organizations. So the summary or synopsis usually will give a broad overview of the protocol, and it should refer the reader to the full protocol for more detailed information. Just as a DMP will typically omit a full version of the study protocol, the DMP will also omit a record of each protocol change or amendment. But in certain organizations, DMP may maintain a list of major protocol revisions and what have been their associated numbers, why the changes are made. Next is definitions and acronyms. The DMP will contain a list of acronyms that are specific to the protocol. And we will see that in the sample DMP example. So these acronyms, like what does DMP stand for, or when they say CRF, what does it mean? And what does CRF mean when it is being mentioned multiple times within the DMP? So right at the start of the DMP document, they'll say that CRF stands for case report forms. So by doing this, putting this there, they ensure that the meaning is not mistaken. Okay, there are no confusions in understanding the meaning of the acronyms. They will that's a note that usually this is the standard process, but sometimes there could be certain components which may not be applicable for a specific study and the organization, and they can be completely removed. Right. Next is the dictionary and the coding management. Now here the DMP should indicate which medical coding dictionaries like Medra is being used or SNOMED is used, who drug is used, which kind of versions of the dictionaries are being currently used within the system. Now, the DMP will also reference documents providing instructions on how to handle the dictionary updates or changes, and defines all the quality control measures, validation methods, and user acceptance testing for the dictionary. The DMP will also describe if there is any auto-encoding, and if there are any study-specific conventions being used. They will list down any appropriate SOPs which are used. Different kind of examples of coding would include your prior and concomitant medication coding. There will be adverse event coding. Medical history coding will be there. Non-AE medical coding also is going to be there, for example, in observational studies. And then if there are any physical exam coding, it will also specifically talk about the person, the training of the study team. So it will specify who are the key personnel's roles, responsibilities for the associated protocol and study activities. Or the DMP may refer to certain external documents or related SOPs which will contain that information. So they may connect it to the training plan. So some of the organizations create a separate training plan. So if the TMP is not going to list down the details of how the training will be conducted and what should be the usual duration and how it will be conducted, the method of conduct, what can basically happen is there's going to be a separate training plan. Sometimes some of the organization creates training matrix, which is basically for each role, which are the applicable trainings. Okay. Then, as I mentioned earlier, there are e-learnings also. So probably a DMP would just mention that e-learning profiles have to be created for the study, and let's say the project specialist of the study would be providing the access to the e-learnings for the study. So all this information will be present in the DMP. And if not the details, at least the link to the training plan and training matrix. Then the timelines are very important, because the timelines which are included in the DMP or document which are referenced by the DMP. So either within the DMP or there will be a separate timelines milestones document created, and the DMP will simply have a link to that milestone. It will list down the completed targets for all the deliverables. An example of this will be database validation could be targeted for completion a specific, there will be a database validation when some specific number of weeks of time of the protocol has been finalized. Or there could be another example of milestone is uh, how many, approximately how many days or months before the CRFs should be finalized before the first subject visit. Or it will also specify when will the first interim analysis occur. When the first 50% of the data is entered, or let's say there will be another protocol which will be looking at the survival rate of the patients. So they will have their first data cutoff when the first deaths occur in the study. So those milestones will be referenced in the DMP, or at least it will give the link that this is the milestone tracker, which is getting updated regularly. Some of the organizations usually maintained a very detailed timeline. Like I said, they would include interim analysis, even internal activities. So timelines will vary based on the parameters of the study, like between paper-based studies and ETC studies also, the timelines would differ. So some of the examples of additional milestones, apart from the ones that I already mentioned, would be protocol finalization, CRF development, database design and UAT, data validation, programming and UAT, first patient, first visit, last patient, last visit, last CRF entered, last query closed, completed. Final essay reconciliation completed. Medical coding completion. Interim analysis, as many as applicable in a given study. Any specific database audits. Database lock. And finally, study data and documentation archival. Then we have the case report forms. We already know what a case report form is. Okay, so it's basically as per the E6 definition, a CRF is a printed optical or electronic document which is designed to record all the protocol required information to be reported to the sponsor on each trial subject. The specific area that can be demonstrated or elaborated within the DMP, or there could be links that can be provided to these elaborations. Okay, so there would be a separate CRF design document maybe, and the link can be added to the DMP. And these documents or the DMP would basically have details such as CRF designing process. They might even give the link to the SOP of central CRF designing process. And the team that will be involved in the CRF designing process. So there will be usually an email ID, a distribution email ID given that this team has to be connected when a new request has to be raised for the CRF designing. Or there could be certain internal electronic tickets that are to be created, or an electronic requests within certain specific tools of the organization where the new CRF designing requests can be placed. CRF instructions would be creating the completion guidelines. We talk about any protocol specific guidelines. Then it will also talk about CRF changes, like describing how to manage the changes to the CRF. It will also reference any SOPs to refer, or which teams are involved, what kind of approvals are required. Changes to the CRFs may also involve metadata changes. And again, this will be governed by certain SOPs of the organization. And those organization-specific trainings and SOPs should be referenced when these case report forms are upgraded. Next is database design and creation and maintenance. So your DMP will refer to an in-depth study-specific database validation plan, and it will include a brief description of how the database is created and maintained. A description of the system that is holding the data and the table naming conventions. Title 21 of the CFR, that is 21 CFR Part 11, also mandates that procedures and controls should be in place to ensure appropriate control of and access to documentation, as well as revision and change control procedures to maintain an audit trail of any kind of modifications done to these documentations. Then SAE data reconciliation. So some of the organizations usually have a separate SAE recon plan. So there is a very detailed safety reconciliation plan. There could be multiple naming conventions, SAE reconciliation, safety reconciliation. So they can have a separate plan, or if not, then they would usually put the details within the DMP itself. And that will include everything. So they might put which specific parameters are to be compared in the CDMS with the safety database, which safety database will be used. What kind of data will be received from the safety database? Will it be an Excel sheet or it will be placed in a central server? Are there any program checks that need to be run on these on the data that's received from the safety team? If it is to be run, then will it be merged with the EDC data and there will be a final error output that will be received? In how many days should they have the reconciliations completed? Who are the people involved when any updates are required? How will the updates be done? Which kind of template tracker would be updated? So all that information is mentioned in the essay reconciliation plan. So DMP has to be very carefully monitored when performing an essay recon. Then is your quality assurance and quality control process. So the DMP will define quality assurance plans, quality control steps, and studies usually will differ because of the regulatory importance also. So occasionally a study will not be carried out within the established quality limit. So if it has a lot of regulatory importance, probably the level of QC would be higher for a study. But let's say a study is not that very well, is not a very high regulatory importance. Uh, it may happen that the study quality control checks may not really be at par, and not always all the quality processes may be carried out, and maybe the quality of the study will suffer. So if that happens, the study is not following the SOPs in place, okay? Or it's just following just randomly. So the DMP will therefore address what kind of checks to be performed. So it will decide on and specify the required level of checking to be performed before the data collection begins. Then, depending on the type and regulatory importance of the study, different levels of checking may be implemented. An example would be an observational study will only need minimum level of checking. But if it's a highly regulated drug or device study, it will require a more stringent level of QC checking. Then the frequency of having these quality control checks. The DMP will specify the frequency of QC. And then also the documentation, how the findings of the QC will be documented. How will they be followed up for closure if the findings require any actions from the study team? Then is the external data transfer. For external data transfers, the DMP should describe the data type, that is, whether it's a safety data or a lab data or an ePro data, the entity providing this data or receiving the data, and then if there are any applicable agreements, so usually between the sponsor CRO and the third party, there is usually a data import agreement or a data transfer agreement, which usually has the details or the specifications mentioned. What kind of data will be transferred, in what format, the frequency, whether it will be cumulative or it will be just incremental. Incremental as in the data is only the data since the last transfer will be received, but not from the start of the study. So uh, even the contact information from the vendor side, in case if there are issues with the file, whom should we contact? If there is some kind of escalations that need to be done, who should be the project manager from the vendor side, who will be involved, and the general contact information with the data transfer. So that is what your external data will consist of. The good practice would be to have an established data transfer plan and to conduct a test data transfer prior to the live transfer. The DMP will describe procedures used for collecting and handling laboratory data. If data comes from any combination of central labs, core labs, local labs, or specialty labs, there should be a short section differentiating between procedures for collecting and handling different types of lab data. Include or reference guidelines on how to transport, track, clean, and report upon the various types of laboratory data. Then comes the metrics. The DMP would typically involve the study level metrics that are being used and the frequency of creating those metrics. For example, query which is open at the site for a very long time. If there is a data entry lag, that is the data when it is first collected versus the first time it is entered in the EDC. So the data entry lag. So your DMP will list down the different kind of metrics that will be created by the data management team. And then it will also talk about the frequency with which they will create those metrics. Some may be monthly, some may be bi-monthly, some could be weekly metrics, and then how these will be shared with the team. Audit plan. So for the audit plan, the DMP or referenced within the DMP, if there is another document that is being created, the DMP should either define the on-site or corrective action plans or refer the documents that cover the processes. All interim and final study database audits will also be defined. The DMP should also define how often during the course of the study quality assurance will take place. So the audit plans could be multiple, it could be internal, it could be external. Certain examples that you can see on the screen is when the data cutoff happens with the 50% of the data entry, sponsor audits, interim and final database audits. It will also include the corrective action plans and the storage of the findings. Then about the database archivals. Now, in the database archivals, it will talk about how to archive the documents of the study and the organizational processes, the SOPs, which will be involved in the entire detailing the steps for archiving of the electronic records. Then other processes. When we say other processes, it will basically is because every study is unique to some degree. So there will be processes within the particular study which may not be covered in any of the previously mentioned chapters that the previously mentioned sections of the DMP or a typical standard template of the organization. So if the study involves other processes, they should be detailed out in the DMP. This could be, let's say, DSMB requirements, for example. If any requirements which are pertaining to the DSMB meetings that may occur during the course of the study. What preparations is expected to be performed in those meetings? Will this preparation be treated as a log, as in having all the data clean and reported prior to the meeting? Will the DSMB only focus on a sample of the data or a complete data set? Other kind of information that can put in is business rules. So specifying specific rules that will have an impact on the data handling and the data integrity. An example would be regularly scheduled IT maintenance, which will limit the server access, or the organization-wide holidays, or an anticipated address change during the course of the study, which may affect the data handling. The other possibilities would be flowchart. flowcharts and forms. So CRFs, source documents, adjudication and query forms, any kind of applicable flowcharts or sample forms. Okay. Problems and resolutions. So how to identify, the TMP may also say that this is the process for identifying a problem, discussing it, resolving, and finalizing the problems when they are facing with any in the study. They will also talk about change control process. So what is change control? Change control process is when there are changes in the study, okay, or there is a requirement of an additional budget and that requires an additional change order. So how will these change orders be looked at? What is the process of having a change order in place? There is a change in the scope of the work, or there is some additional work that needs to be performed. Okay, so the DMP will evaluate how change control processes may be encountered during the course of the study, and then how to work upon them. Blinded review specification. Now, in blinded review it will be what kind of blinded data is required, and what kind of system and level of access is required for the unblinded resource, if there is an unblinded resource, and then which accesses will be needed for them, what kind of work is expected from this unblinded resource, how the data flows from an unblinded resource to a blinded team for the rest of the data processing activities. All that information will be mentioned here. Then talking about reports. This is that the DMP will include list of reports which can be used by the study team throughout the life of the study. And every report should usually have a target audience. And what is the content of the report? What the report is basically, what kind of details are being given by the report? It will also, every report will also talk about when these should be extracted, the frequency of their generation, and how these reports have to be emailed out, distributed across the team. Should these reports be put into a central SharePoint server, a shared drive, or it could be emailed to them, emailed to the respective people who are the recipients. If there are any updates to this list of reports, again, your later versions of the DMP will also include that there are updates to the list. One of the report that we can talk about is, let's say, towards the end of the study or towards the any kind of analysis, approaching analysis of milestones where some level of degree of clean records are requested. So there could be a central clean patient tracker report, or which can be shared with the team, or there could be a report which talks about the activated, inactivated, or locked forms. So those are the, and again, these are very specific towards a certain milestone. So your report section will talk about when these are to be shared. Communications. So the DMP should describe the type of communications and correspondence which are used in the study. Details where records of these communication, whether they are paper or electronic, wherever they reside, and even the associated archiving requirements of such communications, which kind of communications should go into the trial master file. Document how communications will be conducted and outline the regularly scheduled communications. Indicate where to find the communications after the fact. For example, if A particular form must be signed and faxed. The auditor could see this in the DMP, and they need not waste time searching through an email. The DMP should include information on frequency of communication. That is, how frequently the communication is going to be for a specific study, because it usually varies. The communication may be more frequent at the setup stages, very early stages, or towards certain timelines, and they would be relatively lesser during the regular maintenance phase of the study. During the closeouts on the log portion of the study, again, frequency would increase. So most studies will have communication variability. So, but any regular communications that are decided between the study, that should be in the DMP. Then how will these communication happens? That's the medium of the communication. Whether it'll be a face-to-face or whether it'll be a web conference. And there needs to be a description on the amount of time which will be required in the meetings. Then escalation processes should also be mentioned here. That is, if issues need to move up the chain of command, then who are the parties involved and how will this be done? How the escalation should be done and the timelines to have those escalations in place. Welcome to the session of data entry process. We will cover introduction to this data entry process, understanding the workflow, receipt, tracking, what are the different strategies, the considerations while doing the data entry, what are industry best practices around it, some guidelines, finally, post data entry, the kind of review to be done, and lastly, the distinction between paper and EDC data entries. The purpose of data entry process is to ensure the data are reliable, complete, accurate, of high quality, and it is suitable for statistical analysis. The data entry process encompasses the efficient receipt, tracking, entering, cleaning, coding, reconciliation, and transferring of data. A number of factors should be considered when choosing a data entry process, such as the skill level and the training that has been given to the personnel, and the amount of time that is allocated for data entry. Now, data entry can either be performed by data management team, as in cases of paper studies, or it could be done by the sites directly, as in cases of the remote data capture and the electronic data capture studies. With the electronic data capture systems, the traditional data management roles change. In most cases, the site personnel will do the data entry. They also have the capability to run the edit checks and make data updates to resolve the discrepancies. When data managers are not able to make edits, they need to remotely guide the site personnel through data cleaning processes. Now, these processes may take the form of automated checks, which are built into the computer system, or may operate through queries entered into the clinical data management system. When a study is EDC or a paper-based study, the functionality of the tools, the design of the study, and the skill sets of the staff should be carefully considered. Workflow processes for EDC studies will change as per the CDMS software that has been used. Therefore, these are highly dependent on the software developer as well as the organization's SOP. Let's understand the data entry workflow. So, although specific processes and steps may vary between organizations and studies, the flow of data should follow a logical prescribed path. Now, the general workflow of data entry processes for studies using paper CRFs is presented here. And at each steps, there are the various choices that are available. All of these choices are described in the further slides. However, when the data are received, It should be first tracked, or it has to be logged. Then it has to be entered. After the entry, it has to be clean, and then it has to be subjected to various rigorous audit inspections or quality control. Now, to determine which choices are made to each stage of the workflow, this has to be decided by the organization, and therefore the organization should have standard operating procedures and data processing conventions. Data receipt. Now, data receipt process vary across the clinical industry. Data could be received through fax transmission, regular emails, could be with express delivery, which has a tracking mechanism, or it could be private couriers. It could be hand delivered by the monitors. There could be an electronic web-based entry, or through other electronic means also, such as SFTP, that the data can be transferred. Now, regardless of the data acquisition mechanism, the process by which the data are received, confirmed as received, and even made available for data entry, this should be documented in the DMP. There are also standard operating procedures should be in place to ensure that the blinding of the subject identifying information remains, especially such as the name, address, subject initials. Unless collection of this data has been authorized in the informed consent protocol as well as the local regulations. Otherwise, the blinding has to be maintained while doing this data transfer. Ensure that a process is in place to quickly identify also if there are incidences of the violation of the data privacy conventions and laws. If the CRFs are missing, then CRF missing reports should also be prepared for both paper and EDC-based studies to facilitate identifying forms that have not been received. Now, CRFs can be tracked by some of the means. The first one is the electronic data capture, computer-aided page checking, which results in a very higher integrity and efficiency than the manual process. Now, regardless of how the data received, procedures should facilitate timely, high-quality data processing. Expected visit date reports can be programmed into most reporting and tracking systems. By this, we will be able to follow the subject's progression throughout the clinical trial, as well as even predict when the subject will have their last visit. Paper tracking. Now, tracking may occur on an individual CRF basis or as per the modules. So ideally, when all the CRFs are tracked, data that is recorded on the paper forms are recorded in one of the two following fashions. Okay. The first one is the independent logging. In this approach, this involves personnel manually registering that study data and the data that has been received. Now, the data receipt may be recorded in the CDMS, although there could be other tracking mechanisms or systems in place as well. In a dependent logging, what happens is this is more of an automatic approach. So tracking happens automatically once the data has been entered in the CRF. So the good point about this approach is that it eliminates an extensive and expensive manual process of tracking the CRFs, replacing it with an electronic process in which tracking is a cost-free result of data entry. However, there is a trade-off that in any of the steps between the receipt and the entry, if the receipt dates are not accurate, then in that situation, tracking will become a problem. So for a reliable receipt dates, data should be entered when received with little to no backlog. The third one is the tracking third-party data. Third-party data such as laboratory data will be received electronically or on paper forms. Documented procedures should be in place to track data for each external data. that are the various external data that are required in a study. Imaging and indexing CRFs. To provide added security and flexibility for paper-based studies, CRFs may be imaged and stored electronically in addition to storing the paper forms. CRFs should be scanned using well-established formats such as the PDF. The electronic files must be secured so they are only accessible to the authorized and trained personnel. File naming conventions should be very strictly followed, and repository of the CRF images should be indexed so that it allows to locate a specific file very quickly. What are some of the common data entry strategies? Data entry processes should address data quality needs of the study. The following ones is double data entry with a third person adjudication. Here, two people independently will enter the same data, and a third person will resolve the discrepancies between the first and the second person's data entry independently. In a double data entry with a blind verification, again, two people will independently enter the same data, and both will remain unaware of what the other person is entering. If the second person, when he enters the data and enters a value that differs from the first person, the operator will be warned by the system that there is a discrepancy. After this warning, the second data entry person, who is also responsible for verification, he must carefully examine the entry against the source and then determine what should be the appropriate entry before saving it. With this data entry strategy, the second entry person value will override the first person's entry value. In double data entry with an interactive verification, two people will independently enter the same data. The second data entry person will resolve the discrepancies that happens between the first and the second. But here, he will also be aware of what the first person is entering. He will not be blinded to the first person's entry value. Single data entry with a reviewer, where one person enters the data and the second person will review the data against source. There could be another one which is not recommended, but only a single entry is being done and the data is not reviewed. The data ideally will be reviewed subsequently by the data management team. The next one is the optical character recognition. This is a software which recognizes the characters from the paper forms as well as the faxed images, and then the data is directly fed into the database. But because this is software recognition, there has to be a manual review of whatever data has been entered by this software to ensure that there is accuracy of the data. What are some of the considerations to the data entry? There should be written procedures describing data flow, data entry, data processing, and quality levels to be maintained. The process and procedures should provide certainty to ensure the data from the source document is captured from appropriate analysis. Employees are trained on working on systems, procedures, guidelines, reference documents like medical abbreviations so as to minimize any data entry errors. These documents should also be available to the personnel until the study closes out. All the employees have the required access as per their roles and responsibilities. Organizations usually should have a list of users to be maintained, which describes which user has what kind of access to the database. Organizations should also have quality checks to ensure that the data entered is accurate per the source document and it has been reviewed correctly by the DM team. A standard data entry convention also enables consistency of the data throughout the study. For example, if the subject captures, if the study captures an entire date of birth, but the privacy laws of certain participating sites, the local laws of those sites, do not allow this complete date of birth collection, then based on the internal conventions that has been decided, there could be a default value for date and month can be added, and just the year of birth from the sites can be collected. This default value could be something such as 1st of June or 1st of Jan, followed by the actual date of birth, the year of birth of the subject. Automatic saving of the data by the system should be discouraged during data entry. This will allow the data entry operator to go back and check his work before he submits it. Paper CRFs and EDC screen parameters should be identical as much as possible to avoid any ambiguity or errors of data entry. Screen design should be such so as to minimize any data entry error. For example, use of coded checklists or selection options be applied, such as radio buttons and checkboxes. There can also be very clear instructions on the CRF screen of what should be selected. For example, if multiple checkboxes, multiple options can be selected, or just a single option selection is required. What are some of the industry best practices? The first one is address the purpose, characteristics, and complexity of each study in data entry training sessions, including but not limited to the review of protocol, scope of work, identification of critical variables, usually such as what are the subject identifiers, the primary and secondary efficacy variables, safety information, etc. Verify in a test environment, that is before the data entry system is placed into active use, that the entry field functions as they are planned. Example, like the date field will only accept dates. Drop-down list will only contain appropriate values. Okay. In some organizations, true test data pages may be entered for an entire case report form, while in some other organizations, they will focus on just certain few aspects of testing. This is not to be considered as a substitute of software validation or edit check testing. We have to train the team on completion guidelines to understand how data is ideally recorded, and on data entry guidelines for any specific data entry directions. To provide the site, sponsors, vendors, and study team members with timeline expectations for data receipt, tracking, and entry, turnaround time of the data queries, when the file transfers are expected, and the different database deliverables. The tracking mechanisms should be detailed for receipt of CRFs and other forms containing data to be entered. Tracking ensures that there is a control of the received records. Identification of any missing records is easier, and it also facilitates the archival of records at the end of the study. Quality control and assurance plans should be in place to address collection and review of the primary and secondary safety data. During active data entry, metrics and trends will help ensure that a stable and desired quality levels are consistently achieved within the study. A comprehensive change control process should be developed and maintained, which acts as a guidance to the team in cases of data updates. What are certain data entry guidelines? When either paper CRFs or an EDC system is in use, detailed data entry guidelines should be provided to all the data entry staff. All the data entry personnel should also be provided with the written documentation that should be received and understood by these people. Data entry guidelines may be a part of a broader user manual, particularly for studies using EDC systems. Both data entry guidelines and user manuals may take the form of paper documents or an online manual. The following topics should be considered for inclusion in the data entry guidelines or user manuals. Contact information of individuals available for troubleshooting of the computer problems and the hours when this help will be available. Instructions or conventions describing how to enter the data, delete data, respond to queries. Instructions or conventions describing how to enter data for single or multiple record panels. Reminders to users that a date time stamp and a username are recorded as a part of their audit trail for every record. The audit trail may not be visible depending on the system that they are using. Even if it is not visible, the audit trail must be readable by the inspectors and the auditors. This has to be clarified to them. Information on computer system security. Instruction on proper computer shutdown procedures to prevent any loss of data. Instruction on data entry personnel explaining appropriate actions when edit check triggers or reconciliation windows for double data entry system appears. Data review, data cleaning refers to a collection of activities used to ensure the completeness, validity, and accuracy of data. Data cleaning activities may include manual reviews of data, computer checks that identify inaccurate or invalid data using ranges, missing data, protocol violation, consistency checks, certain descriptive stats that reveals an unusual pattern in the data. Early in the study, data should be reviewed from several subjects at each site to help detect the problems with the data entry screens, which are not functioning as per the expectations, or because there's this lack of sites understanding or compliance to the protocol. So following are the data cleaning activities to be performed. Verifying that the raw data has been entered accurately in the computer, that the code list is valid, numeric ranges, there are reference ranges or normal ranges that get applied to the numeric values on submitting the values, identifying and eliminating any duplicate values, and the system flags if any critical or mandatory fields has any missing values. We're able to identify if the codes and the values are invalid. Usually there should be a warning or a pop-up message from the system indicating this. And also there should be a tracking mechanism which ensures that all CRFs that have been received were entered. For multi-forms related data, such as CONMEDs, related data, all the related data is received and they are entered. For example, if AE page is received, all the CONMEDs that were taken for each AE is also received. CRFs should have investigator comments for data anomalies. For example, if certain data is not falling within the protocol expected criterias or fails the logic of the checks, there should be an explanation why this discrepancy is the way it is and it cannot be further rectified and that it has to be acceptable as is. We should also ensure that the data which is entered are logical and consistent across the CRFs. That is, the way dates are reported, it should be logical and consistent. It should not be UK in one format and then US in another format, which completely changes months by their use. Okay, this could be just one example of logical data entry. Likewise, if it is required that Height has to be written, has to be reported in vital signs page at every visit. Ensure it's the same height that gets reported. Confirm inclusion of guidelines, which are detailing the reconciliation of critical data, such as those that are mentioned here. Then there could also be range checks that could be designed to identify statistical outliers. These are values that are physiologically impossible or outside the normal variations for a population under study. Consistency checks can also be designed to identify potential data errors. For example, checking the sequential order of dates, corresponding events, missing data noted to exist elsewhere. Checks designed to identify protocol violations should be very closely monitored to allow timely actions that can be taken. A site can be monitored and investigated when stats or other checks indicate substantial differences from other sites. So in terms of performance, one site is not doing, is far different from the rest of the sites. Certain data cleaning distinctions. After entry and review are complete, flags or notes are generated outside the database for a paper-based study. And these are submitted in the individual data clarification forms. During data entry, and review by data management, these flags and notes may be compiled. The CRAs or the monitors can also create these during the monitoring. For data entry systems, such as remote data capture application, which allows only entry of data, flags or notes are identified by monitors, and they are treated similarly to paper. That is, data clarification forms are issued. For EDC systems, which shows data discrepancies on the screen in real time, this allows site to action on these sooner. Sometimes EDC will close these discrepancies automatically as soon as the data entry is done or the entry is corrected. But sometimes the screens will only allow manual closure of discrepancies. This is to allow a thorough review of the data change before the issue is closed. With respect to listings, cleaning listings differs from cleaning discrepancies. Flags and notes that, because what happens is this will require a higher level of review by monitors, coders, statisticians, safety team, lab specialists. So when the review is being done on these listings, that's when all that information, all the data discrepancies are collated, and then a periodic data clarification form is sent to the site. However, for EDC, it becomes easier because there are program checks, auto checks that can be created to resolve the discrepancies. Then there are also listings that are created where external data such as labs, once they are received in-house, they are compared against the EDC data, and then the resulting listing will give the discrepancies, which are then queried within the EDC system in real time. Now, data may be changed as a result of data cleaning procedures, in which case the site and data entry, data center or sponsor must retain a record of all such changes. Data changes should be recorded and documented by a fax or an original site signature acknowledging the new data. This documentation is usually accomplished using a query or a data clarification form. In these cases, the site is expected to keep a record of the change within their study records. There could also be certain other updates, such as data cleaning conventions under some circumstances may be used. These cleaning conventions specify the data that can be modified without a site's acknowledgement. These are called as the self-evident corrections. And examples include appropriately qualified personnel correcting obvious spelling errors, converting values when units are provided, or there could be missing identifiers where the true values are obvious. Now, because the site must have a record of all the data changes, the site will also receive and maintain a copy of such versions of data conventions. Although it is strongly discouraged, situations do occasionally arise where telephone conversations with the site are utilized to authorize a data change. If this occurs, these changes should be clearly documented by the site who has authorized the change and the data center representative who was talking with the site. In this way, a record of the conversation and the authorization will exist at both the locations. In any case, any data change authorizations must be documented in writing, and they should be included in the study file for audit and inspection. Now, the different types of data changes that can happen in a paper-based and an EDC study. Entry changes or errors that can happen in a paper-based is system or process changes. They will be reflected in the data entry work instruction. Then changes will be reflected in the audit trail. And authorized changes are submitted by email and or phone. A hard copy has to be created for patient folders, both in the corresponding CRF pages at the site file. And because it's a DCF, which was issued by the DM team, it will also be a part of our DM file. In EDC, this becomes easier because queries are generated and they are a part of audit trail. So no additional filing is required as the EDC system captures all of this. Here, in paper-based self-evident corrections, they should again also be documented. A self-evident correction instruction that is created for the study is also shared with all the parties involved in data handling. Here in EDC, self-evident corrections becomes a part of your electronic audit trail. So obviously with the audit trails, username and the roles, it becomes very easy to understand if it was a site personnel or it was a sponsor CRO personnel who was making these changes. Site-initiated changes should be documented through a manual data clarification form. So if site is also initiating any data changes proactively, then that has to be also requested through a data clarification form. This could be resulting in a data update, or it could be simply an explanation or a new update over an existing data. In EDC, all of that becomes a part of the audit trail because the new information, whatever it is in the form of comments, in the form of data updates, gets captured in the system's audit trail. With this, we come to an session's end for data entry. If as a CDM personnel, we are allowed or we are asked to perform the data entry, going through the organization's SOP is very critical. Understanding the system functionality with respect to data entry, what kind of responsibilities are being extended to us, whether self-evident corrections are applicable, all of these aspects are to be clarified before beginning the data entry. Thank you very much.